Hey, and welcome to Matt and Jess TV. I am Matt Rose.
And I'm Jessica Bun Bun.
Welcome to our reaction and review for Black Mirror Season 7, Episode 3. This is Hotel Reverie, and I'll say it from the get-go. This is probably one of my favorite episodes of the entire show, not just this season. I love the concept of this episode so much, and I think this is the joy of Black Mirror sometimes, is that you just can get an idea that feels so immersive and interesting, where you kind of see bits of pieces of the story in other shows or movies. Like, this episode reminded me of everything from The Truman Show to Pleasantville, but it's incorporated, I think, in this package here that's both dystopian but also romantic at times, but also then terrifying at times, kind of molded. I just think this is a really incredibly interesting idea.
I was very excited about this episode. I really like Issa Rae from way back in the Insecure days. It's one of my favorite shows. She's just amazing. I also really like black and white cinema. So this just had the makings of everything for me, including romance. And I love love. So I am here for the love aspect of it.
Yeah, there's just so many different aspects of this episode that I think work so unbelievably well, whether it be the premise, the use of black and white, the way in which you kind of see the mechanics of this world that Brandy, Issa Rae's character, finds herself in. Also, just seeing Issa Rae do something totally different than what I'm used to seeing from you. Also, Emma Corrin just like completely immerses themselves into this role in particular. Like, we covered A Murder at the End of the World, which is a really interesting show, but every time I've seen Emma Corrin in something, they've been just like totally different.
Yeah, they're amazing. I mean, completely different role for them in this Black Mirror episode. It was just, this Black Mirror episode feels to me like nothing they've really done before.
Yeah, we're gonna get so much into this, like what worked for it. You know, are there any questions, any issues that we have with it? But before we go any further here, be sure to hit that subscribe button, because we are here through all of Black Mirror this season. The highlights, the lowlights, like, we're going to give perspective on where everything stands. And in addition to covering Black Mirror, of course, we are in the midst of The Handmaid's Tale, and The Last of Us is kicking off, and we are extremely excited to get fully into that.
Also, join us on our Patreon if you want to chat with us more about Black Mirror. Also, we are covering over there The Pit, which is winding down. Still such a great show. And we have Bosch Legacy over there as well, and is the only place that you can get those reviews. So thank you so much to everyone who has joined our Patreon and is helping us out.
Thank you guys so much. We really appreciate that. Okay, so let's just start from the get-go here. So Issa Rae's playing Brandy, who is this actress who gets this opportunity to be a part of some sort of reimagining of a bit of classic cinema. And I feel like Brandy's not the only performer in this fictional world. At any time you get an opportunity to explore classic cinema, these are some of the movies that you probably grow up watching, idolizing. The premise of how they set up so that she would want to be involved in some experimental production, I think that all worked because it was Hotel Reverie. It was a name that meant something to her, to the extent that she's kind of willing to overlook the perhaps atypical ideas around this.
Yeah, I liked also that her character was very much like, I'm really tired of playing sort of a supporting role. Like, I've made my mark now at this point. I feel like I could be playing a lead, and I should be playing a lead. I want to do something that has more depth, that's more romantic, that's more just filling of your soul. So when this opportunity comes up, of course, she's like, okay, I want to do this, but I want to play the lead. And, you know, I know that the lead is a male, but now if we're reimagining it, why can't it be me, sort of thing. And with the way that they're putting this together, where they're basically filming this movie in a couple of hours, it was just, it seemed like everything was just falling into place. They, you know, the production team couldn't get any of the Ryans or any of the Chris's on board. So they were like, oh, wow, Brandy wants to do this. She's a huge star. Absolutely. Let's do this.
One thing I really like, just as we're getting into the production of it all, is we see a Streamberry reference, and that is the streaming companies, aka Black Mirror, making fun of their own daddy in Netflix. It's not a sequel to Joan is Awful per se, which that was my favorite episode of last season. Maybe that's why I like this one so much. But just to kind of have that Easter egg in there was fun because it's also sort of speaking to this idea that these big corporations, they're willing to do almost anything they can to avoid paying people for a normal Hollywood production.
Here's the thing about Streamberry and Netflix. I really like that they are okay to be the bad guys
Yes.
in a lot of their own Black Mirror productions. I think that there's something really cool about that, that they're
Yeah.
a little more self-aware that big companies, are seen a lot of times as the villains and that they are playing villains in their own stuff. It's nice to see that happening. I'm looking at you, Duke, who's having a bit of a problem with somebody wearing a Duke t-shirt on White Lotus. Get a grip.
Duke's having an even harder time after seeing the memes after they blew a big lead at the end of one of these games. But no, I really like how Netflix is willing to roll with the punches here
Yes.
because the basic construct of what makes even just this whole Hotel Reverie project so weird is that apparently this entire movie is just we're gonna take a big name current actress and then we're just gonna throw her in the world that already existed and these performers. So literally you're not hiring anyone else, you're not doing anything else. All the money is either hiring Brandy or just this technology where you are going to throw her into the world of this movie as it once existed.
Yeah, it really is just AI and the Brandy put into this. So anyone who's out there spending money to go and see this, the idea of it is supposed to be just like a complete recreation, except now Brandy is in this film.
Yeah, which is kind of bizarre from a consumer angle.
I
I don't
agree.
know. It's just like, oh, I can go see the same exact movie that I've already seen, but one other person is in it. There's a couple of things with this episode that if you think about them too much, maybe you start to wonder whether or not they really work. But I think where Hotel Reverie as an episode really starts to sing for me is when we get to Brandy actually being in the world of this movie. She's being communicated on the outside and told, okay, follow the script, do this, do that, do this other thing, and we'll continue to make this story work. So we kind of get into this intriguing sort of butterfly effect situation where she's told that she has to follow the script to make sure that every single note in the original movie works. But if she goes rogue in just 1 second, then everything else has to start to spiral and everybody has to kind of like think on the fly.
Yeah, and they really are just all thinking on the fly. Like nobody bothered to actually sit down with Brandy and ask her some of the simple questions like, can you play the piano? Are you able to do this? Because if you can't, then we miss this beat. Okay, maybe we'll do production in a little bit so that we can make sure that you can play the piano. Like things like that. There was no discussion, which is what makes it all turn sideways. The minute I really love that Issa Rae still was able to play some of her comedic notes because she's so funny.
Yeah.
So to watch her get up there and just butcher that song and even have Clara looking around like, oh, interest is dropping. I'm like, no kidding.
There was just that dark humor through a lot of this where it's like everybody else in the world is still operating like they would in the world, and you have to be this like old school charmer to be able to pull all of this off. There's nothing that, completely turns away charm quite like hearing chopsticks being played over and over again because Brandy doesn't have any other idea. But I think this whole situation, and you've touched on it, the idea that they didn't really have any of these conversations with her going in, like it just speaks to, I think, the ego and the laziness of a lot of companies that just sort of think, okay, we can churn out all these hits really quickly. We don't have any sort of love of cinema. You guys couldn't get Seth Rogen's character from the studio to get in here and try to shape them things up. But okay, the really interesting part of all of this is, of course, when there's a bit of an outage on the outside world here, and Brandy no longer has the ability to get like the lines, anything directly fed to her, and she's sort of left to her own devices in this world that she doesn't belong in and that she doesn't really understand how to operate in.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting that all the AI is now paused except for Clara, who is also AI. So it was a little bit of suspension of disbelief. It's kind of, for me, it's like all the AI or none of the AI. It's not all the supporting characters except for one is still out there. But it did make for some really good romance, which I love. And
Mhm.
Brandy had kind of looked a bit up of the actress Dorothy before she had went in to kind of learn that after this movie she became a bit of a recluse. Nobody was really, getting into her life, but everyone was trying. She was in all of these gossip magazines and nobody really knew why or what was going on. She became more and more and more recluse and private. And once they're in the world together, some of it starts to come about where Brandy is, just like, listen, like, you're not real. This isn't real. And she's really breaking this Clara apart to the point that she's like, you know what? I don't need you. I need some answers. And we see her break through the wall and get some of these answers where she realizes that she is this actress and what this actress went through. And because of the time, she couldn't have this relationship with this woman that she was in love with, and she had to keep everything hidden, and she ended up just not being able to handle it.
I think this episode at this point is just speaking a lot to this idea of what does it mean to be independent? What does it mean to be free? And we're talking a lot about mixing it with the AI, the whole does this unit have a soul phenomenon of
Right.
everything, where it's like, okay, am I still somebody who can think and act for myself if I'm in this world that has been just completely created for me to exist in? I guess there's even a little bit of the Barbie movie thrown in here
Yeah.
at this point, but I just think the performances were so well done in the writing and sort of the ideas that were playing into all of this, because I think Brandy ends up finding a part of herself that she doesn't have on the outside world within this strange world where they can't even really leave the hotel, where you sort of go out of this and it's like there's nothing outside of this in the movie, so none of this even exists out here either. But it speaks a lot to the interesting ideas of escapism, escaping your own world, but also a little bit of the terror, because I think Black Mirror is meant to make us all feel really, really uncomfortable. And there
Yes.
is this just like undercurrent that, if this technology was made commercially available, like, you do run this risk of totally just losing people to being a part of something like this if they start to realize that this artificial world is better or more suitable to them than the outside world, and then they just don't want to live in the outside world anymore.
Yeah, because it seems like time is going faster in there. So their
Yeah.
relationship is developing very, seems quickly, but for them, it's, over a long period of time. So actually seeing when they get their machines back up and running, where Brandy's kind of like, what happens if I don't leave here?
Yeah.
Like, is that an option? No, no, it's not an option. Your body will die. Okay, but then what happens to my soul? Do I just end up in here? Because I might be okay with that option.
Yeah, and it's a spot that clearly she never thought she was going to be in, but I think they developed that relationship between Dorothy slash Clara and Brandy in such a tiny amount of time that it really actually felt fleshed out and justifiable that she would think that way by the time the servers get put back up. But then, of course, because this is Black Mirror and nobody can have a prototypical happy ending, we
No.
get to this point where it's like, okay, Brandy, you fell in love with this person that's a byproduct of this technology that we created. And because this is technology, we can just reboot it. So we're going to complete the movie. We're going to reboot this. And then all these memories that you had with her, they're just going to be gone. And she's not going to remember any of them anymore.
So heartbreaking. I absolutely,
Yeah.
it was so difficult to watch this part of it where Brandy is still standing there and Clara's back into the role. She doesn't remember anything.
Yeah.
She thinks that Brandy is Alex again. And Brandy just all of a sudden, she only has a certain amount of time to finish this before, her body is lost. So she's got to be the professional and get right back in there again. But it's changed her forever.
Yeah, it's changed her forever, and because of that, she can't really follow the script entirely anymore. And that's why I'm glad that even after the reboot, like, the cleverness of this episode still exists where you can just see that Charlie Brooker and Issa, I don't know if Issa did any improv in this episode or not, but just like they really played around with this concept so much. And I just think it was something that everyone who was a part of this really enjoyed the premise of it and the idea of it. And they weren't really excited to leave it anytime soon either. I mean, this was a particularly long episode. And yeah, I think
Yes.
there were probably a couple of minutes that dragged a little bit towards the end, but it's a byproduct of that. This was just so interesting that you really wanted to just sort of sit around and explore in it and kind of figure out, okay, well, how in the world can this actually end?
Yeah, there were parts of it that dragged. This was a bit too long. They could have tightened it up. But I will say that by the time we got to the end where she's running into the police station and
Yeah,
Kimmy's on the phone basically being over the mic being like, "You got to hurry it up. You only have 3 minutes, so just tell them
yeah.
exactly what happened and get out of there." The comedy of it was just so good.
Yeah, there was just so many different things that were being mixed together genre-wise that it was almost impossible to predict where things were going to end. I mean, we have this brutal death scene that ends up happening that
Yes.
is heartbreaking but quintessential Black Mirror that I think I was prepared to be like, okay, you guys got me so invested, and then of course you're gonna break my heart. But then when Brandy eventually does get out of all of this, we see that there's this way for her to have a phone conversation with Clara on the outside. And I was just taken aback to such a degree because I'm so used to Black Mirror not giving us a happy ending on anything at all.
I was completely shocked that we got any kind of happy ending at all. Like, I know Clara didn't really know what was going on and who she was talking to, but it was nice for Brandy to be able to sort of have this opportunity, almost like, is there a way to rebuild this again? Where this is the relationship, a bit of a long distance relationship, we'll call it.
Yeah, I am curious if they ever decide to either revisit this idea, revisit these characters, because yeah, once upon a time, the idea of a Black Mirror sequel felt like it was never going to happen. But look where we are now with USS Callister. I think that there's something more that they could choose to do here if they really wanted to. I think there's probably going to be some people out there who feel like this episode is not bleak enough or even just like not devastating enough, even though we did see, Digital Clara end up dying at one point, but, lo and behold, she ends up back. But I just thought this was a really refreshing change of pace for the show, an idea that was put together in a way that I've never really seen before that does sort of raise these questions of like, okay, there can be on paper things that you can get out of new technology that can be interesting for certain people, but they're also just so terrifying inherently in terms of like what could be done with them that it's like, okay, all of this kind of outweighs the benefits in the end.
Listen, I know that this wasn't as bleak as Common People, and
Yeah.
that was bleak enough for me this season. I like a good mix. I don't need every episode to be
Yeah.
as depressing as that was, or I probably wouldn't be watching this show. I'm not here to just go into a show and be depressed every single time a new season comes out. They really got me with Common People. Then, they're moving into other things here with this particular episode where there's a little bit of romance. There's definitely a lot of technology, high stakes. If Brandy doesn't get out,
Yeah.
she could die. And to have it end up in this situation where it's like, okay, she has a little bit of a happy ending. She's able to use this phone to be able to call into the technology and speak to Clara, but she's never going to be with her again. So there is still, to me, quite a bleak, tragic ending to this love story.
There really is. I think in totality, this episode just stands out for me in a way because I felt more. It's ironic because so much of this is about immersion, but I felt more immersed, I think, in this episode than any episode of Black Mirror that I've watched in a really long time, where I really felt like, especially halfway through this episode, that I was just fully there watching this story play out. And at that very moment, before it started even to drag a little bit to the end of it, I was just like, I don't want this to end because I'm so invested in all of this. And just from a character building, world building perspective, they did such a good job with this. I'm really curious to hear what people had to say about it.
Yeah.
But let us know in the comments. Is Hotel Reverie an all-timer for you? Is it too much based on these ideas that you don't necessarily need as much on Black Mirror,
Mhm.
just let us know in the comments. And also hit that subscribe button. We don't want you to miss any more coverage of Black Mirror. Plus, The Last of Us, The Handmaid's Tale, pretty busy time here at the channel.
Yeah.
And you can support us further by joining our Patreon. That link is in the description. We are covering exclusively there The Pit and then
Mhm.
also Botch Legacy. Thank you guys so
Thank
much.
you.
We'll see you here next time.